Tensions in the Middle East have once again reached a boiling point. After a dramatic escalation involving Israel, Hamas, and now Iran's direct condemnation of an attack in Doha, reports indicate that Israel targeted Hamas leadership figures in Qatar's capital city, striking what were described as Hamas headquarters or safe houses. The fallout has been immediate, with Iran blasting Israel for carrying out what it calls a reckless and dangerous assault on sovereign soil, and threatening revenge if such actions continue. This development represents one of the most dramatic shifts in the ongoing Gaza conflict. As the fighting now spills over into the diplomatic and political arenas far outside the borders of the besieged Strip, at the heart of this story is the Israeli strike, allegedly directed at Hamas leaders who were meeting in Doha. Israel has long viewed Hamas not just as a military adversary in Gaza, but as a political and organizational network with bases and decision-making hubs outside Palestinian territory. Qatar has often played host to Hamas officials, both for political mediation and as a location where Hamas can safely operate. By striking in Doha, Israel appears to have signaled that nowhere is truly safe for Hamas's leadership. For Israel, this is about dismantling the command and control of the group at its core, but the attack also risks destabilizing Qatar's role as a mediator and enraging regional powers who view such actions as violations of international norms. Iran's reaction has been particularly strong. Tehran immediately condemned the attack and accused Israel of crossing a dangerous red line. Iranian officials labeled the strike a blatant act of aggression not only against Hamas, but against Qatar itself, which is a sovereign nation and has often acted as a middle ground between warring factions. By issuing threats of revenge, Iran is positioning itself once again as Hamas's primary regional protector and signaling to Israel that the conflict will not be confined to Gaza or Lebanon, but may widen if such bold moves continue. Iran's warning carries weight because of its extensive network of proxies across the Middle East. From Hezbollah in Lebanon to militias in Iraq and Syria, all of which could be activated in response to any further Israeli operations. The scale of the strike itself highlights Israel's evolving strategy in its conflict with Hamas. Traditionally, Israeli operations have been limited to Gaza or occasionally extended to Lebanon and Syria, where Hezbollah or Hamas affiliates operate. By allegedly striking in Doha, Israel is showing that it is willing to pursue Hamas leaders far beyond its immediate borders. This is part of a broader doctrine of preemptive action, where Israel argues that eliminating enemy leadership before they can plan or coordinate major attacks is essential for its security. However, such actions risk isolating Israel diplomatically, as they can be seen as violations of another country's sovereignty and an undermining of mediation efforts. Qatar has been a critical player in the Gaza conflict for years. It provides humanitarian aid to Palestinians, helps mediate ceasefires between Hamas and Israel, and often serves as a back channel for negotiations that no other nation is willing to facilitate. An Israeli attack in Doha risks damaging that fragile role. If Qatar feels targeted or undermined, it may withdraw from its mediating position, leaving fewer avenues for diplomatic resolution. Moreover, Qatar is closely aligned with other Gulf states and maintains strong ties with the United States, meaning that any escalation on its soil has international ramifications beyond the immediate Israeli-Hamas conflict. From a regional perspective, Iran's threats of revenge must be taken seriously. Iran has historically used asymmetric warfare to respond to Israeli or Western actions, leveraging groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen. If Iran feels compelled to retaliate, it could authorize its allies to escalate attacks on Israel or Israeli-linked interests, whether through rocket fire, drone strikes, or cyber warfare. Iran may also target Israeli shipping or interests in the Persian Gulf, raising the stakes in an already volatile region. Such an escalation could easily spiral into a broader regional conflict, something that global powers like the United States and Russia are keen to avoid, but which becomes more likely as direct confrontations between Israel and Iran increase. The bombing of Hamas's headquarters in Gaza itself also plays into this narrative. While Israel claims these strikes are aimed at degrading Hamas's ability to wage war, the damage to civilian infrastructure and the high casualty counts fuel anger across the Arab and Muslim world. Iran uses these images of destruction to bolster its argument that Israel is acting with impunity and must be confronted. By linking the Gaza strikes with the Doha attack, Iran is able to frame a narrative that Israel is not only oppressing Palestinians, but also destabilizing the wider Middle East. This kind of framing resonates with regional populations and puts pressure on governments to take stronger stances against Israel. Israel, on the other hand, argues that it cannot allow Hamas to operate freely, whether in Gaza, Lebanon, or in luxurious hotels abroad. Israeli officials have long accused Hamas of directing military operations from outside the battlefield, where leaders live comfortably, while civilians in Gaza bear the brunt of the fighting. By striking abroad, Israel sends a message that leadership cannot hide behind borders or diplomatic protections. Yet this approach risks blurring the lines between combatants and sovereign nations, creating new enemies where Israel may have previously found cautious neutrality. The timing of these events is also crucial. The conflict in Gaza has already drawn in multiple actors, with Hezbollah exchanging fire with Israel in the north, Houthis launching attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, and protests spreading across the Arab world. By bringing Qatar into the equation, whether intentionally or not, Israel may find itself facing a wider coalition of anger. Iran, always eager to capitalize on such moments, is now threatening revenge, which could come in many forms. It may not be a direct missile strike from Tehran, but rather a coordinated series of actions by its regional allies. It's designed to stretch Israel's defenses and send a message of deterrence. The international community is watching this escalation closely. The United States, which has deep ties with both Israel and Qatar, faces a particularly delicate balancing act. Washington relies on Qatar for hosting its largest Middle Eastern airbase, and for diplomatic mediation with groups like Hamas and the Taliban. At the same time, it remains Israel's strongest ally and defender. If Israel's actions in Doha are confirmed, the United States will be forced to walk a tightrope, trying to reassure Qatar while not alienating Israel. This kind of tension can complicate Washington's broader goals in the region, particularly at a time when great power competition with China and Russia also plays out on Middle Eastern soil. Russia and China, for their part, are likely to seize on this moment to criticize Israel and, by extension, the United States. Both Moscow and Beijing have cultivated closer ties with Iran and often frame themselves as champions of sovereignty against Western intervention. They will likely argue that Israel's alleged strike in Doha proves the hypocrisy of Western powers, who criticize others for violating international borders while excusing Israel's actions. This diplomatic battle and international forums like the United Nations will further polarize the global community with Israel and its allies on one side in Iran, Russia, China, and sympathetic Arab nations on the other. For ordinary Palestinians, however, the situation remains dire. While political leaders argue and regional powers threaten revenge, the reality on the ground in Gaza is continued bombardment, destruction, and humanitarian crises. Israel's strikes on Hamas headquarters may degrade the group's military capabilities, but they also devastate civilian neighborhoods and infrastructure. This feeds into the cycle of resentment and resistance, ensuring that the conflict continues rather than reaching a resolution. Hamas uses these attacks to rally support, both domestically and internationally, portraying itself as the defender of Palestinians against Israeli aggression. Iran's threats of revenge only add fuel to that narrative, making Hamas appear as part of a larger struggle supported by powerful allies. Israel's decision-making at this juncture reflects its calculation that military pressure can force Hamas into collapse or at least severely weaken its ability to govern Gaza. Yet history has shown that Hamas, and groups like it, often thrive under pressure, using the image of resistance to gain legitimacy. If Iran steps up its involvement, either directly or through proxies, Israel may find itself fighting not just Hamas in Gaza, but multiple fronts simultaneously. This is the nightmare scenario for Israeli strategists, who fear a coordinated assault from Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, and Iranian-backed groups in Syria and Iraq. Such a multi-front war would test Israel's military and civilian resilience like never before. The role of Qatar in all this cannot be overstated. If the strike in Doha undermines Qatar's willingness to mediate, it removes one of the few channels through which ceasefires or humanitarian pauses can be negotiated. Without Qatar's involvement, Israel and Hamas are left with fewer intermediaries, making any de-escalation much harder. This risks prolonging the war indefinitely and increasing the suffering of civilians. Moreover, Qatar may feel compelled to respond diplomatically or even align more closely with Iran and Turkey, reshaping the regional balance in ways unfavorable to Israel and its Western allies. Iran's threats of revenge are not just rhetoric. History shows that Tehran often follows through, though in ways designed to avoid direct confrontation while still inflicting pain. Whether through missile strikes launched by Hezbollah, drone attacks from Yemen, or cyber operations targeting Israeli infrastructure, Iran has many tools at its disposal. Each of these potential actions carries risks of escalation. Yet Iran may feel it has no choice but to act, lest its credibility as the defender of Palestinians be undermined. For Israel, this means preparing for a wider range of threats, stretching its military across multiple theaters. The narrative battle is as important as the military one. Israel wants to project strength and deterrence, showing that Hamas leaders cannot hide anywhere. Iran wants to project defiance and solidarity, showing that Israel's actions will not go unpunished. Qatar, caught in the middle, wants to project neutrality and diplomacy, but its soil has now allegedly been used as a battleground. The United States, Russia, and China each want to project influence, aligning with different sides of the conflict for their own geopolitical aims. In this clash of narratives, truth often becomes secondary to perception, and perception is what shapes regional alliances and public opinion. For the wider Arab and Muslim world, the symbolism of an attack in Doha resonates deeply. Qatar is seen not only as a wealthy Gulf state, but also as a supporter of Palestinian causes. If Hamas leaders are not safe there, it raises questions about the security of other regional actors who oppose Israel. It also fuels anger at what many perceive as unchecked Israeli aggression. This anger translates into protests, boycotts, and pressure on governments to take harder stances, further complicating diplomatic efforts. Economically, the stakes are also significant. Qatar is one of the world's largest exporters of natural gas, and any perception of instability in Doha could spook markets. If Iran retaliates in ways that disrupt energy flows, the consequences will be global, affecting everything from fuel prices to supply chains. This raises the costs of escalation not just for the region but for the entire world. Israel, Iran, and Qatar all know this, which is why each move is calculated not only for military effect, but also for economic and diplomatic impact. In summary, the Israeli strike in Doha, the subsequent bombing of Hamas headquarters in Gaza, and Iran's furious reaction represent a dangerous new phase in the conflict. The key dynamics involve Israel's strategy of targeting Hamas leadership wherever they are, Iran's threats of revenge and its proxy network, Qatar's endangered role as a mediator, and the international community's struggle to contain the fallout. The unique feature of this development is that the battle has now spilled far beyond Gaza, touching the heart of the Gulf and threatening to draw in a much wider set of actors. It is a reminder that in the Middle East, local conflicts can quickly escalate into regional crises with global consequences.